Alrighty then, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Hello everyone, good afternoon. My name is Avery Cunningham and welcome to SEO's March webinar on preparing for the OAT. Thank you all so much for joining us. I hope you're all staying safe and healthy as we move into this new year. Again, my name is Avery Cunningham. I am a Student Services and Admissions Officer here at SEO. I'm one of the admissions team members who will answer your inquiries and questions about the admissions process and then participate in the application procedures later in the year. Before we get started, I do ask that we all use proper Zoom etiquette by keeping our microphones muted unless speaking, limiting our background noise just in case we are unmuted for some reason during the webinar, and respecting all of this webinar's attendees and facilitators. We will have time for questions towards the end of the webinar, but in the meantime, if you do have any questions or concerns that need immediate attention, please use your chat feature to communicate with us. Also, a quick disclaimer, we in Memphis, Tennessee, where this webinar is being hosted, are experiencing a bit of a severe storm throughout the day. I do not anticipate us losing power or connectivity at any point during the webinar, but I did want to make that disclaimer just in case we do have any interruptions due to weather within the hour. So thank you so much. So today we'll be discussing the OAT, possibly the most important exam for any student considering a career in optometry. We will open the webinar with a general overview about the exam and the application process, the registration process, recommendations and resources for how to prepare. And then towards the second half of the webinar, we will open it up to a panel with class of 2024 student ambassadors who will share their insights and experiences about the exam. Another quick disclaimer, I myself am not an optometrist. I have never attended optometry school, nor have I ever taken the OAT. This information that has been compiled and shared for you guys from this perspective is based on research and professional experience. And finally, this webinar is being recorded and will be free and available to view starting tomorrow on our website. All righty, so let's jump right on in. So starting with, what is the OAT? Well, in its simplest form, the optometry admissions test is a standardized exam sponsored by the Association of Schools and Colleges of Optometry. It is the entrance exam that is required of all students seeking admissions into optometry school. In its most simplest basic sense, the OAT shows the aptitude for basic sciences, but it also demonstrates a student's capability for the intensive coursework they'll be exposed to in optometry school. And it also is a good measurement for the skill a student may have as a future optometrist. The OAT is accepted and more often than not required by all 23 schools of optometry in the US and 2 in Canada. Now, there are temporary changes to that requirement due to COVID-19, since the OAT does need to be taken at a testing center, which I'll be talking a little bit more about later. There were some concerns in 2020 that students would not be safely able to travel and visit a testing center to take the exam. So some schools, including SEO, do have optional exams that we recommend for students, such as the MCAT or the GRE. Now that is a temporary change. I'm not sure how long that temporary allotment will be allowed. So I will say, if you can safely take the OAT, please by all means do take the OAT. It is the exam we prefer. It's the exam that we're most familiar with, and it's the exam that provides the best assessment of how a student will perform in optometry school. Also, if you do choose to submit the MCAT or the GRE instead of the OAT, your scores will need to be in the top percentile in order for those scores to be accepted. The OAT provides a very standardized measurement for optometry school applicants, like any standardized tests such as the MCAT, or the GRE, or the ACT or the SAT. It really provides the best equal measurement of how a student is meant to perform. The skills and techniques that will be tested on the OAT cover reasoning, critical thinking, reading comprehension, data analysis, and problem-solving skills. Now, the OAT is a little bit different than other standardized tests or exams you may be familiar with. This test is not just about memorizing information, regurgitating information, and proving, what concepts you're familiar with or the information that you know. The ability to think critically and analytically and to approach a broad range of scientific concepts is just as important as your ability to answer questions correctly on this test. So on the screen before you, you're seeing a breakdown of the OAT section by section, question by question, minute by minute. So when including the optional tutorials, breaks, and post-test survey, the OAT amounts to about 280 minutes, covering about 230 questions, which leaves you just over a minute per question. This is a huge test. As you see, it's very broad. It covers a long amount of time. Before I get talking or get into the breakdown of each of the different sections, I will say that there is no penalty for guessing with the OAT. It is always in your best interest to answer every question on this test before the time runs out. So starting with the Survey of Natural Sciences section, which covers about 20 minutes total and includes biology, general chemistry, and organic chemistry. Now, the biology section of this test is a broad subject, so please study broadly. I have interviewed or spoken with so many students who do not study broadly for the biology section. They assume that all they need to cover is anatomy and physiology because of its connection to the medical sciences, and that is most certainly not the case. Just as an example of the different topics that are tested or covered in the biology section includes cellular and molecular biology, diversity of life, developmental biology, genetics, evolution, and anatomy and physiology, just to name a few. So please, when you're approaching this section of the test and your study habits and your study plan, approach this section broadly and generally and try to give yourself as much of a base as possible. Next, it would be the general chemistry section. This section will involve more calculations in biology and therefore more time for scratch work. So please include those time allotments in your study plans. You will have 30 questions total in the geometry section, and that is all within the 90 minutes that you're allotted for the entire natural sciences section. So when you're studying for the general chemistry section of the test, please consider how much time you may need to perform those calculations and do that scratch work and how that may bite into your time overall. The next section of the Survey of Natural Sciences portion of the OAT is organic chemistry. Now, these questions are going to involve drawing reactions, complex figures, as well as naming and identifying molecules. The next section of the OAT is going to be the reading comprehension section, where you're going to have 3 passages to read with 16 to 17 questions per passage. And some of the key skills tested in this section will be your ability to find the main idea, process information, and read and understand dense passages. Something else that I run into a lot with students when going through the application process is that they completely disregard the reading comprehension section. They assume, especially if their native language is English, that they don't need to focus on the reading comprehension section or even study for it. They'll spend all their time on the physics or Survey of Natural Sciences and essentially go into the reading comprehension section blind. I implore you guys, please do not do that. The reading comprehension section is just as difficult and just as intensive as the rest of the OAT, and it does require your full respect and attention when prepping for the OAT. I've seen students who perform well in their other sections, but may, perform rather low in their reading comprehension section. And because of that, they may have to go all the way back and retake the exam to bring their score up. So please do take the reading comprehension section seriously when approaching the OAT. The next section of the OAT after your optional break will be the physics section. This section of the test is widely considered the most difficult section of the OAT. It is a broadly tested category, so please study broadly. Again, I've run into students who assume that just because it is related to optometry, that they only need to cover aspects of the physics topics that cover optics, such as vision and light. That is most certainly not the case. The physics section covers equal parts theory and command of math and problem solving skills. So take all of that into consideration when you're approaching this test and your study plans for it. Your final section of the OAT is going to be the quantitative reasoning section. This is where you're going to see most of your math skills tested, mathematic proficiency and problem solving, covering topics such as algebra, geometry, trigonometry, and word problems. Now, the breakdown of the OAT that I just gave is a very cursory overview. Great resource to get more of a very detailed play-by-play coverage of exactly which topics are going to be covered within each section of the OAT is the 2021 OAT guide, which I'll be talking about a little bit later. And then I will be sharing that via an email with all of the registrants and attendees of this webinar, so you'll be able to review it further. In that guide, they give a very, very detailed, thorough overview of which topics you can expect to see on the test. So please, before you even consider registering to take the OAT, take a look at that OAT guide to give a good sense of what you can expect to see on the exam. So next, we're going to have a conversation about what it means to be competitive on the OAT. And before we get started, I want to just explain the graph that you guys are seeing before you on the screen. This is a profile of our entering class going back to 2010, which covers our number of applicants, our number of enrollments, our average GPA, and then our average OAT scores for our entering classes. I'll be talking about this graph a little bit more later, but I want to draw your attention to it first. Now, the OAT is graded on a 200 to 400 point scale. There's one grade for each section, a total science grade, and then an overall academic average. 320 plus is considered relatively competitive, traditionally speaking, on the OAT. 300, 310 is considered the low end of the average, and then a below 300 score will be a recommended retake from SEO. SEO, we try to stay very holistic when making admissions decisions. Students are assessed based on their entire application, which includes their transcripts, their letters of recommendation, their short essays, how they perform on their interviews, and so on. It's not just about your test scores. We like to see a well-rounded student. So even if you're focusing a lot on your OAT, try not to be too top heavy and try not to put too much focus on your OAT scores, even though they are very important. Now, going back to the graph you're seeing on the screen before you, we at SEO try to use the averages of the previous year's entering class as a guide for where we expect the OAT scores to fall within each given year. And as you can see, these scores are becoming relatively more and more competitive. While we are expecting still around the same number of applicants, the exact same number of enrollments, the GPAs are getting higher with each entering class, and the average OATs are getting higher with each entering class. So please take that into consideration when you're making your OAT prep plans. While 320 plus is considered competitive, if the previous entering class is scoring a 336, 335 on average on the OAT, those are the scores that we are going to expect to see within our next entering class. Also, all of our entering class profiles are available on our website and free to view. So I definitely recommend taking a look at those before you begin your optometry school application process. So the question of when you should take the OAT should really be preluded by a couple of questions. First, when do you want to apply for optometry school? Most students, depending where they are in their educational experience, will take the OAT the summer after their junior year. And we also recommend that we give students about 3 months to study, and then about 30 days or so, even less, between the time you take the OAT and then when you hit the submit button for your application, just to give yourself a little bit of buffer and time in case you need to plan to retake the OAT. So overall, that can give yourself a good 6 months within the prep time you're having to do to prepare for the OAT, take the test, and then submit it to your schools. So consider that when you're making those types of decisions. If you are someone who is hoping to apply for the next entering class, the cycle for the 2021-2022 year, then you should have registered to take the OAT already and should probably be studying for it right about now. If you are only a sophomore or even a freshman, you have a little bit more time. So consider all of that when you're trying to decide when to take the OAT and plan around when you actually plan to apply for optometry school when considering that. Also, something to consider when you're deciding when you should take the OAT is the question of, have you finished relevant prerequisite courses? We at SEO recommend taking at least introductory levels of the courses tested on the exam prior to taking the exam itself. That means your physics courses, your biology courses, organic chemistry, and so on at a collegiate level. The reason for that is it could be very disarming and overwhelming if you are jumping into those topics or subject matters without any previous experience. Say, for example, you have not taken a collegiate level physics course yet, but you're trying to study for a very broad and very difficult physics exam on the OAT. Having that time to speak with a professor, to work with other students in that type of environment before beginning to study for the OAT will give you a great sense of what you can expect on the test and a strong kind of foundation for how to approach the subject matter. Another question you should be asking yourself is, when will you have time to study? Now, please do be honest with yourself when asking yourself this question, and be honest with your schedule. Studying for the OAT is an intensive process, a time-consuming process that requires a lot of energy. If you're attempting to juggle a lot in your life right now and too much, you could end up sacrificing the time you should be taking to prepare yourself properly for the OAT. I've also had a lot of conversations with students who say they want to take the OAT at a certain time, but also in the midst of their prep, they are having family issues, or their undergraduate course load is very heavy, or they're working a full course of hours in whatever respective job they're in. and they ultimately don't have the time they need to study. So when they show up to take the exam, they're causing themselves more harm than good. So even when you're having that conversation around when you should take the OAT, you should very much be honest with how much time you truly have to study, especially when you consider that we recommend giving yourself at least 3 months to study before the test. Our application is a rolling admission cycle. It opens on June 30th and closes on March 1st. And again, this is a rolling admission cycle. Your personal application deadline should not be March 1st. You should plan or hope to have your application submitted as early as possible. June 30th would be the best choice. The earlier you submit your full application, the more opportunities you will have, the more scholarships you may be considered for, and the less competitive the cycle will be for you. So please take all of these options and questions and considerations into thought and to mind when you are asking yourself when you should take the OAT. So now we're going to talk about the process of registering or applying to take the OAT. On the screen before you, you're seeing a link that will take you directly to the website you need to visit to start the application process. Again, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website starting tomorrow. So no need to worry about taking notes. All of this will be shared properly tomorrow. And I'll also be putting this link in the chat features for those who would like to copy and paste it. Now, when going through the process of registering to take the OAT, the first thing you'll have to do is request a PIN in order to apply. Now, this PIN number will be used to help identify you throughout the OAT process. So please take the information that's requested of you of that PIN seriously and keep track of that PIN number because it will come into play later. You are required to read that 2021 OAT guide that I mentioned earlier before applying. And please don't think of this OAT guide as, a kind of terms and conditions where you say you read it when you really didn't. This is a very, very thorough document. It gives minute detail for how you should approach the OAT, what you can expect of the test itself, as well as the registration process, the testing process, what you can expect of the testing center. It is really in your best interest to read this guide, not only before registering to take the exam, but before even considering how you want to start your optometry school journey. It is hugely beneficial. And again, I will be sending it as an email when I do a follow-up email tomorrow with all the registrants. So you'll be able to have immediate access to it. You are also able to request accommodations if you are an individual with a documented disability or medical/mental health condition that may affect how you are able to take the OAT test. Now, do keep in mind that the OAT administration does base their decisions around who deserves accommodations around the Americans with Disabilities Act. So that is definitely a document to follow up with and view. Excuse me, I have a question. Will you post the recording the recording will be posted tomorrow when the full webinar is completed. Sorry, just addressing that question there. Alrighty. Oh, excuse me. As I was saying, you are able to request accommodations, but only if your accommodations fall within the Americans with Disabilities Act. You'll be required to download, complete, and submit a request form along with an evaluation report from an appropriate healthcare professional and documentation of previous accommodations. So if you do intend to request accommodations, keep all of that in mind because you will have to go through a pretty thorough request process. All of the OATs are administered through a Prometric testing center. You'll be taking the test via a computer at a physical testing site. After your initial application or registration and fee are processed, you'll receive instructions on how to contact Prometric and arrange a date and time for the location of the test. We recommend trying to scheduling your actual test date about 60 to 90 days in advance, just to give yourself enough time to prepare for the OAT and also to account for any changes in the schedule that may happen over those 60 to 90 days. So to give you a more solid idea, if you hope to take the OAT in June, register to take it in March. The OAT is a very expensive exam. The cost to register is $490. The fee to reschedule can range from $25 to $150, depending on how far in advance you apply to reschedule. And if you request any additional score report fees after your time of application, that'll be an additional $40. One of the kind of hacks for the OAT that we recommend for a lot of students when you're doing your initial registration, go ahead and select that you want your score reports sent to all of the OAT schools, all 23 schools in our consortium. That of course does not mean that you are expected to apply to all 23 schools, but this kind of helps take away some of the extra costs if you decide that you want to add some additional schools to your application list once you start the optometry school process. If you go ahead while you're registering, select all of those schools as the schools you want to receive your scores, you can ensure that no matter which school you ultimately choose, all of them will receive your scores and you won't have to pay any additional money to have any new score reports sent. There were traditionally fee waivers for the OAT, but as of this week, according to the OAT's website, those fee waivers are no longer available. That is something that could change over time, so please do check back regularly to see if those fee waivers have been reinstated. The test can be held throughout the year, so you do have a good bit of flexibility when deciding when exactly you'd like to take the OAT. So do keep that in mind and into account. But also, again, think of those 60 to 90 days that we recommend scheduling in advance. You can take the OAT at any time, but maybe don't schedule around the holidays. Maybe don't schedule around a time in your life when you know you'll be particularly busy. Try to keep your schedule, future, past, and present in mind when you are registering to take the OAT. Now, just like with everything else, there have been some effects on the OAT due to COVID-19. One of the main ones is that there are now limited testing sites and reduced capacity. So please be prepared to schedule your test date far in advance and also be prepared for scenarios where your test date may be moved back. I personally don't anticipate this being as much of an issue in 2021 as it was in 2020, but I can definitely say we did have some students last year who had registered to take their OAT in March, and then due to isolation requests, quarantines, reduced capacities, things of that nature, their test date kept getting moved back and back and back. Some of them weren't able to take their OAT for the first time until November, which is well into the application cycle. And it really, put a bit of a wrench in their entire optometry school plans. Again, I don't foresee this being as much of a concern in 2021. The OAT administration seems to have the capacity and testing sites well under control at this point, but that is something that you should anticipate in case the COVID-19 scenario changes again. Also, there have been some test policy changes. While all testing centers are currently open, that may change depending on how a certain state approaches any surges in COVID-19 cases. So please be aware of that. And also, social distancing and face masks are enforced at all the testing sites at this time. On the screen before you, I've also included a email address. That is a great place to start if you have any COVID-specific questions related to the OAT. The OAT administration is great about keeping everybody updated and to changing their policies to adapt to the current situation around the coronavirus here in the US. So please, if you do have any COVID-specific questions around the exam, follow up with them at that email address. Now, when it comes to preparing for the OAT, here are a couple of main points to keep in mind as you move through the process. First off, don't regurgitate, remember, and retain. Do not cram. This is not a test that you should be cramming for. And we recommend giving yourself at least 3 months to study prior to taking the exam, and do spread out how much time you are spending each day studying for different sections of the exam. I'm sure when our student panel comes in, they'll have some of their own personal recommendations for how to approach the studying portion of the OAT, but do give yourself some time. Allow yourself to pace across these 3 months. As we shared earlier and talked about earlier, this exam is broad. It's covering a wide range of materials and subjects and topics. So giving yourself the necessary time and energy to study for those in due course is definitely necessary. Also, something to remember, an A in the course does not mean a perfect score on the exam. I have also run into a lot of students who assume that just because they scored A's in their physics courses or their biology courses, they don't need to study for the biology or physics section of the OAT. That is also certainly not the case, especially if you took your biology course as a freshman and you're now trying to take the OAT as a senior. There's a very good chance that you're going to need a thorough review of the biology course subject matter before taking the exam. So while it's great to know your strengths, to know your weaknesses, to know the sections of the test that you feel pretty confident about, do not assume that just because you scored well in an academic course on the subject that you're going to get a perfect score on the subject test. Please respect the OAT and respect how much time you'll need to study and properly prep for every aspect of the exam. Also, create and maintain a habit of review. It's never too early to start. It's never too early to prepare. Even just a little bit of a time when you're reviewing your notes from your relevant courses, keeping some of that information sharp and readily available, just so you can avoid, again, that issue of cramming for the OAT in the months or even weeks before you're scheduled to take it. Also, figure out how you like to study. Do you like to study alone or in groups? Are you a visual or practical learner? How much time do you feel you reasonably need per day to dedicate to studying for the OAT? These are things you should be asking yourselves now, if you're an undergraduate, asking yourself how you best study, how you best approach studying. But this is also definitely a question you'll need to answer for yourself as an optometry student. So it's best to go ahead and figure out, what kind of studier you are, what kind of learner you are as you go into preparing for the OAT. Another good resource for reviewing is to create a study group in your pre-optometry club. If you're currently an undergrad, if your school has a pre-optometry club or even a pre-health club, talk to the other students in that club and, create an environment where you all can study together, feed off of each other, and use each other as resources. The OAT is such a big test, and it can come with a lot of stress and anxiety and a feeling of isolation. Even if you do not feel as comfortable in formal study groups and studying with other people, just having that group of people that you can reach out to and say, hey, I'm 2 weeks out from my OAT dates. I'm feeling a little bit nervous. Any words of encouragement can really go a long way in helping you feel more confident and prepared. Also on the screen here, you'll see some study guides and resources that we recommend here at SEO for the OAT, including the Kaplan Review, the OAT Destroyer, which is a study book, Chad's Videos, which is a series of virtual lectures on different scientific topics that a lot of students have found really helpful. The OAT webpage also provides a lot of practice tests that are available for students. I've definitely talked to students who feel that the practice test gave them a great kind of parameter for how they may assume to perform on the OAT before they study and then after they study. Also, some of the best resources you'll ever have when approaching this test will be other students, professors, and pre-health advisors, especially other students. Those who have taken the exam will have some of the best, most relevant information about how you need to prepare for it, and some of their own recommendations for how to perform on that exam. So the day of the OAT, here are a couple of things to keep in mind. First off, report at least 30 minutes early to the testing sites. And in fact, I would recommend, if possible, visit the testing site the day before to ensure you're able to, one, locate it, and two, determine how long it will take for you to get there. I've also run into a lot of students who just have an address for their testing site, and they wake up on the morning of the test and they have no idea where they're going, and it may take them 3 hours in traffic to get there. Don't let that be your mistake. Take the time the days before the test to find out where you're going and find out how long it will take you to get there. Also, have any transportation needs confirmed and prepared. If you will be driving yourself, make sure your car is filled with gas and ready to go. No taillight issues or things like that. If you're taking public transportation, go ahead and map out your journey, so to speak, how you're going to get from point A to point B. If you are asking people to transport you, whether they be Uber, or you're having friends and family who are driving you, make sure they know where they need to go and have them prepared early to take you there, and also have plans for how you're going to get home after the OAT. These types of little things will really help the day go a lot smoother and help eliminate a lot of the stress that people may have the day of the exam. Also, something to keep in mind when you show up to take the OAT is that you'll be asked to produce 2 forms of ID. That means driver's licenses, passports, social security cards, credit cards, debit cards, or library cards. And also, please ensure that your name on your OAT application matches the name on all of your IDs exactly. If there are any changes or delineations from your name between what you provide on the OAT application and what you present them on your driver's license, there is a chance that they will not allow you to take the test without more thorough identification procedures. So go ahead and eliminate a lot of the headache, and be sure that whatever name or identification you're using on your OAT is going to match what you present them on your driver's license, passport, social security card, etc. You may expect biometric data to be collected, such as your photograph and fingerprints. And also, due to COVID-19, you may also expect them to check your temperature upon arriving at the testing site. And depending on the rules and regulations of that particular state, there's a chance if your temperature is not where it needs to be, you won't be allowed in to take the test. So please keep all of that in mind when you're preparing the day of. You'll not be allowed to bring any personal items into the test with you. Your phone, food and beverages, writing utensils, wallets, keys, jackets, purses, etc. will all be required stored in a personal items locker. And then finally, note boards, markers, and a basic calculator will be provided for you on the test. You will not be allowed to bring any scratch paper in with you. You'll not be allowed to bring your own calculator. So when you are beginning your study process and you're taking practice tests, keep all of this in mind so you can be prepared for those changes in how you might traditionally study. For example, if you are most familiar with your own calculator, do a couple of practice tests where you're using a basic calculator so you won't kind of have that expectation and that crutch, so to speak, going into the test. After the OAT, your unofficial scores will be automatically and immediately available. I've also talked to a lot of students who feel kind of a little bit jarred when they finish the OAT and they're able to see their scores immediately. It can be a bit of a jolt and a shock when you don't have that kind of waiting period between taking the test and seeing how you did. Those are your unofficial scores. The scores that you see immediately are your unofficial scores. Your official scores will be sent to schools within 3 to 4 weeks. We at SEO recommend going ahead and recording your unofficial scores and sending those to SEO in advance of your official scores. Even though you may not be invited for an interview until your official scores are submitted, going ahead and adding those unofficial scores to your file will help SEO admissions representatives have a better sense of your application as a whole and be ready to go immediately as soon as those official scores are available. There is a 90-day waiting period between attempts to take the OAT, and you will need authorization to take it for the 4th time. Please do not think that you have to take the OAT only once and get a great score. 75 to 85% of students take the OAT only once, but for some students, this is a very difficult test that you will require to take more than once. But this is not like some exams like the ACT or the SAT where you can just keep taking and taking until you get the score you need. Please respect this score every single time, respect this test every single time. Try to be as prepared as possible when you're first taking the OAT. If you do not get the score you need, that's okay. You can make plans to go back and retake if necessary, but treating that first testing as your first and last testing will help kind of eliminate some of the stress that may come from having to take the test multiple times. And again, if you do need to take it a 4th time, you'll need to go through extra steps to authorize that extra testing. For SEO, scores older than 2 years will not be accepted. So if you have taken the OT, but it's been more than 2 years and you've taken it, you will be required to retake the test no matter what score you earned on that earlier testing. That's definitely something to be in mind if you're someone who maybe has been out of school for a while, or if you're someone who has taken the OT previously, but it's kind of starting your optometry journey over again. So that is a quick overview of the OAT. I know we covered a lot of information, a lot of cursory information. I definitely recommend everyone check out the 2021 OAT guide. Again, a lot of the information included in this webinar was taken from that guide. It's a bit long, it's a lengthy read, but it definitely will give you some great resources to help prepare you for the test. Now we're going to be turning it over to our panel portion of the event, where some of our current students will talk about their OAT testing experience. So first off, everyone, for our guest panelists, would you mind introducing yourself, saying hi to our attendees?
Sure, I can go first. My name is, can you hear me okay, first of all?
Yes, we can definitely hear
cool.
you.
All right, hi, my name is Jackie Molish. I'm actually a 2nd year student, and I'm from Dallas, Texas, and I went to Southern Methodist University, and I'm excited to answer your questions today.
Hey y'all, my name's Serena. I am also from the Dallas-Fort Worth area of Texas. I'm a 1st year. I graduated from Baylor University in Waco, Texas, and I too am super excited to be talking to y'all today.
Hey guys, can you guys hear me first off? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. I'm Alex Smith. I am from Mattoon, Illinois, and I went to the University of Illinois. I'm a 1st year, and yeah, just like everyone else, I'm excited to share some knowledge.
So my name is Corey Zwallen. I'm from Idaho, and I'm also a 1st year student. And going through this slideshow with Avery, it just kind of brings back some of these anxious memories I had from preparing and taking the OAT. So I'm excited to share my experience with you guys. So it's pretty exciting.
Alrighty, thank you guys so much. So we do have some questions prepared, and then at the end of the webinar, we'll turn it over to questions from all of our attendees. But starting off, would you guys feel comfortable sharing what your final or your highest OAT scores were?
Yes. Okay, this is Jackie again. So I took the OAT once, and my academic average was 360 and my total science was 360. So that made it pretty easy. I was actually really surprised when I took it because my highest sections individually ended up being physics and organic chemistry. And I think those were the ones I was most nervous about. So I think the extra studying in those areas paid off in that respect.
This is Serena. I took the OAT once as well, and my total academic average was 350, and my total science was 60. And I had a similar situation to Jackie's, where my physics and OChem were my highest scoring sections, and I was one of the people who did what you probably shouldn't do, and I took the OAT before I took the second semester of physics. So that was definitely a big shock to me as well.
Hey guys, this is Alex. So my total OAT score was 340, and my highest section was a 390 on quantitative reasoning, and then I got a 340 tied between reading comprehension and physics as my next top scores.
So this is Corey again. So I ended up getting a 350 on the OAT with a total science of 340. My top scores were reading comp and Gen Chem by some miracle, 380. So yeah.
Alrighty, great, thank you. So when did you guys begin studying for the OAT relative to when you took the exam?
I'll start. This is Jackie again. I also want to say too, just because the four of us on here, most of our OATs were actually like higher than the SCO average. So if you take it and your score isn't where it is, obviously there's still ways to get to SCO, and it is a holistic application cycle. So don't let that scare you from what we just told you. But as far as my timeline, so I did things a little bit differently. I knew I was a double major in undergrad with music and biology. So during the year, my schedule was just absolutely packed. So I knew I was going to take the OAT over the summer, and I took it the summer before my senior year. Luckily, I had pretty much every prerequisite out of the way except for anatomy and physiology. So I felt pretty okay as far as the material. My test was scheduled at the end of July. I ended up taking it on July 29th and working my way back. I basically started studying around May 15th or so, right after my semester ended in the spring. And during that summer, looking back, it definitely wasn't the most fun I've ever had in a summer. But it was everything I really needed to do to get prepared for optometry school. I worked part-time at SMU to have a little bit of income. I shadowed in the afternoon, and I studied at night pretty much for the OAT. And I think that really worked for me, just to have that kind of time set aside to really focus on being the best applicant I could be. Another thing I would say too, one of the things I was really grateful for was my living arrangement. I was living with a roommate who was also working. So we kind of kept to ourselves and focused. And as much as I love my parents, I think if I would have been home that summer, they would have driven me bonkers. And I'm not sure if I could have studied as much. So yeah, my timeline was May 15th to July 29th, kind of condensed, but I spent a lot of time. And also for reference, my actual OptumCast application was submitted July 16th. So I actually submitted like all my applications before I even took the test, which is also a little non-traditional, but I wanted just to make sure I had enough time to fully prepare. And then I sent the scores, the unofficial scores, to all the schools and pretty much had some interview offers from there.
For me, I took a little different approach. I also took my exam the summer before my senior year. And I kind of just knew myself and knew that I didn't want to spend months studying. I just kind of wanted to crack down, grind it out, take the test. Because I knew if I took a whole, semester, an extended period of time studying, I would get burnt out or forget things and get anxious about that. So I knew I needed to take a course during the summer that I was also studying for the OAT. So I took genetics at the beginning of the summer, and I thought that I was going to be able to take that course, work, and study for the OAT. And it was a rude awakening for me to realize that, taking a semester course in 4 weeks and it being genetics as well it was unreasonable. So I ended up having to move my test date. It was scheduled for late July. I ended up scheduling it for mid-August to give myself a reasonable time to prepare, and waited until after I finished genetics to start studying for the OAT. So I really only studied for a month and a half for the exam, because I started studying the beginning of June and took it beginning of July and took it mid-August. But it was honestly like the perfect amount of time for me. I studied and I worked part-time. And I think it just worked out really well because I would take a practice test every weekend. So I took around 4 or 5 practice full-length tests. So I was able to continue to review the material that I may have looked over earlier in my studies. And it just really worked out well for me. But definitely, if you feel like you need more time to study, or you really want to build the material, or you have other commitments, extend your studying period. But yeah, it just personally for me, it worked out. And like I said earlier, I had to learn physics too on my own. So it took me a while to grind that out. But and in the end, it worked out really well.
Okay, hey guys, I just want to apologize in advance. It just started downpouring, so if you hear any thunder behind me, that's what that is. But as far as studying goes, so I took it at the end of my junior year of undergrad. So what I did is after finals, I let myself have a week break. So I still started studying in early May, and I actually stayed on campus. And that way I could go to a library. Of course, COVID times, everything's different now. But since I started studying in early May, I took my OAT at the end of June, like the day before applications opened. So that gave me around 2 months. Unlike some other people, I didn't have a job at the time. So I committed like 4 days a week, 4 to 5 hours per day, studying for the OAT. And for me, that was enough time to where I didn't get burnt out. Of course, it wasn't super fun, but like it's temporary. And you want to do good the first time if possible, so you don't have to endure it again. So yeah, I just studied for 2 months, 4 days a week. And I think it turned out well for me, and I'm happy, and I don't think I would change the time period or the amount of studying I did.
So Corey again. So my timeline looks a little different. So my undergraduate institution has like a 3-track system. And so I was kind of going year round. And then I guess it was my second to last semester, it kind of bled into when the application opened, and I was still taking classes that would be tested on the OAT at that time. And so I ended up taking the OAT about a month after the application cycle opened, and it left me only with 2 weeks before like I actually took the test from when I was still like in a full semester with work and everything. I did buy like an OAT book, a Kaplan book, a year before, and kind of was spending a couple weekends a month just kind of looking over and going over some things. But I did exactly what Avery says not to do, and I spent 2 weeks before just cramming everything. So it worked out for me, but I definitely would, if I were to do it differently, I definitely would have had more time just to study set aside before the OAT. But it's just kind of what it worked out with my classes. So.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. So I know some of you may have touched this a little bit earlier, but did any specific topics prove to be especially difficult or frustrating?
I think for me, it was kind of frustrating to motivate to study some of the biology stuff that's just really not interesting. Like I've never found like the genus species stuff interesting, or the stuff about the plants that's covered, and that's all still important to know and can be tested. So at times I felt like that was kind of a chore to have to study through, but ultimately you just read it, know it as best as you can, and move on.
For me, it was definitely Gen Chem. The struggle was real with Gen Chem. I don't know what it is about it, but when you took a class, you know, for me, it was my first and second semester of college. And even then it was difficult, and you're, you know, asked to regurgitate it or relearn it to make it make sense. I'm definitely a bio-minded person, so having to relearn Gen Chem was not my cup of tea. And I think it was one of my lower sections on the exam. And reading comprehension. I'm such a slow reader. It was my worst section on the OAT. I think I got a 330 on it, and studying for that part was, again, not my favorite. So those are my two.
So I think the most frustrating part about the OAT for me was the bio section. I'm a molecular and cellular biology major, so you would think that that's not the case, but since my major had so much to do about only inside a cell, we didn't learn too much besides my freshman year about like animals or like the human body, besides when I took anatomy for one semester. But I believe I actually took anatomy after the OAT, yeah. So learning broader biology was difficult for me, and the fact that biology, there's just so many like subcategories of biology, that was what made that the most difficult for me. So even though I'm a bio major, the biology section was the lowest scoring for me, I think. So yeah.
So for me, I actually didn't take OChem 2 before I took, actually I never took OChem 2 before I took the OAT. And so I was pretty worried about that. If there were a lot of things, I guess I just didn't know what I didn't know. I tried to, do some extra enrichment, outside of school to try and bridge the gap with that. And I think it worked out okay. And I had heard that it wasn't, super OChem 2 heavy. Don't quote me on that, because again, I didn't necessarily know what I didn't know. But it worked out okay for me. That was kind of hard. I do remember like there on the biology section, on all the practice tests I'd taken, there were never any pictures. And then on one question, it popped up a histological slide, and it said, what type of organism could this be from? And I was like, what? I was not ready for that. So, some things were kind of annoying, but overall it was, about what I expected. So.
Great, thank you. So what was your practical test taking experience like? Are you registering for the test center, the testing staff, the use of the technology, et cetera?
Okay, my answer is probably one that will make the students on here like nervous.
So I said I took the test July 19th, which is true, but my test was scheduled July 28th and got moved. So I woke up on the day of my test that I thought and got calls, emails, and texts that my test was no longer scheduled that day. So like commence full panic mode, like tears, crying on the phone, lots of stress. But it worked out okay. There was an issue with like the building that one day. And so I got rescheduled for the next day. It was fine. But other than that one snafu, everything was really easy. As Avery talked about and kind of getting ready to take your test and knowing where to go, I recommend doing a dry run, actually like driving to the testing center at the time of day you will take the test. And that just helps ease like nervousness. I know taking the test like around Dallas, some of the testing sites are in like high-rise buildings. So you just driving before and knowing where to park and knowing where to go and that kind of stuff helped ease my nerves a bit. So my test, I ended up taking it like on a Sunday. And so the Sunday before I had driven to or the Saturday before when it was supposed to be, I had driven before to just see the site. So I would recommend doing that.
I did the same thing. I did a dry run. I actually took my test in Waco at school, just because I was working there at the time. And it wasn't bad. It was, I don't know what I was expecting, but it was definitely kind of like a cement box. So that kind of threw me off. But you kind of just walk in. We got a little locker. You could put I had like a quick hit sheets of summaries of all the different sections, put that in there, put your snacks in there. Highly recommend bringing a jacket. You don't know what the testing environment's going to be like. That was a huge piece of advice that some people who had taken the test prior to me told me, just because if it's freezing in there, it's kind of hard to focus. And it was freezing in there, but I was also sweating a whole ton because I was really nervous. So it didn't really make a difference. But yeah, bringing a jacket, the testing people, but honestly, the lady was so sweet. She was like encouraging me because she could tell I was freaking out. But yeah, they give you your little we had like a dry erase board, some markers. I think we had 2 dry erase boards that were front and back that you could write on, and a marker for anything that you wanted to use it for. And we got these noise canceling headphones because all the people there aren't necessarily taking the same exam as you. Like some people are taking their MCAT or their nursing certification or whatever. So I did it at Prometric, and I went with a girl who was taking the OAT at the same day as well, but they give you these headphones. So if any noise is going around, you can cancel that out. And yeah, I think that's it. You get your break, you can go eat a snack. Some people weren't allowed back in their lockers for their testing experience. I personally was, and the physics portion of the test for me was after that break. So I went to my locker and like looked at my little equations before going back into the exam. But I heard some people didn't have that experience. So not 100% sure, but I'm grateful that I did.
So I'll just go off of what Serena said, because I was also able to look at like a cheat sheet I had. I was able to open my phone during my 15-minute break, have a snack. Like people who are taking their step exams, I think every exam just had like a different like thing that what you're allowed to do during your break. But for me, it was, and ladies at my testing center were really nice. I know like other people who had taken it at different ones in the area, not so much, but I mean, you're not really around the testing center staff that much, so it doesn't really matter. I will say, I'm from like a rural area of the country, so I registered for my OAT in late February, and I wasn't able to get a spot because I had a specific day I wanted to take it. I wasn't able to get that at the one that was like right next to me. So I had to schedule it an hour further than what I thought, which was fine. But just keep that in mind if you live in an area where there's not a lot of Prometric stations. I will say my prometric little cubicle was cold, so I wore a hoodie and I was glad to wear a hoodie. And then like also if you needed to, you could use your sleeve for like an eraser if you made a mistake. What else do I have? I think that's it. It was really nice. All the people there were amazing. All the students that you're taking tests with, again, they're from all walks of life. They're all just as stressed as you. So you have like before 8 a.m., you're just all sitting there and like, oh, what are you taking? Good luck. And then, yeah. Oh, and I had someone else drive me. So I had my dad drive me the morning of. So I could like look at review sheets or not have to focus on driving before, which I thought was helpful.
Yeah, so the Prometric place nearest to me was kind of booked out, so I had to book one about 3 hours away. And so I ended up getting a hotel the night before, and I just slept terrible, but that's probably more anxiety rather than the hotel. And then I remember, I get to the center and everyone they were pretty nice. And then I just see some other people. I saw this one kid with like a huge stack of textbooks, and I was like, oh my goodness, what test are you taking? So I remember one kind of pro hack is they usually do have earplugs but you have to ask for them specifically. And so that helped me a lot. I think they do sometimes have like the headphones, but they didn't look very good. So that helped me because it's kind of like a computer lab, at least that's what mine looked like. And other people are like furiously typing. It's kind of distracting without the earbud or the little earplugs. So that was helpful. I would just make sure that you have ample time and to take deep breaths and you're not stressed, because it's stressful enough as it is. So.
Great, thank you. And real quickly, I don't believe anybody here took the OAT more than once. Did anyone here take the OAT more than once? As our panelists?
I didn't.
Just once.
Okay, alrighty. So then following up, looking back, what would you have done differently when approaching the OAT, if anything?
I can go first. First, I would say you're never going to feel ready. There's always going to be more that you could study, but you have to like weigh the pros and cons. So I had a bunch of friends who pushed their tests back, and they were like, I wish I wouldn't have pushed it back and just bit the bullet and done it then, because it just prolongs your stress. Of course, if you actually don't feel prepared, by all means, extend your test time, because this test is expensive. So if you can only take it once, like that's the goal. You don't want to have to spend an extra $500 if you don't have to. Something that helped me is, of course, I could look back at my physics formulas during my break. They allowed me to, but I actually wrote them down on my piece of paper like immediately. So like as soon as I got into the testing center, even though physics wasn't first, I wrote down everything I could just so I wouldn't have to like think about it actively or like in the back of my mind through all the other tests. Besides that, get used to the calculator that is on your computer, because that's pretty much the exact same calculator you get. No fancy scientific calculators. Oh, something that I really recommend is don't study the day before the test. Have your mind have like a brain break, or if you're going to, just look at like review cards you have. Don't try to like cram last minute stuff in, because for being honest, it's probably not going to help that much. So just give your like brain enough time to marinate everything in. Oh, and for the reading section, it helped me to actually skip the reading, like the stories, and I actually use the method of like going to search for the answer, which actually saved me a bunch of time. And that's all I have.
For me, I think just an overarching idea, recognizing that the summer you plan to take the OAT may not be the most fun, and being comfortable with that. Like, you are probably going to have to dedicate an ample amount of time to really grinding for this test and taking it if you only want to take it once. And your plan should be to only want to take it once. If you kind of have in your mind like, oh, I can always take it again, that's true. But if you can like grind this out, get it out of the way, I think you'll be so much more satisfied, because you can really start focusing on your application cycle. Or if you do that before you take the test, whatever the case is, you really only want to have to take it once. So just allow yourself to settle in to the idea that this summer maybe, or this time in my life may just be dedicated to pouring into this exam, doing really well on it, making yourself proud so you can continue on with your application process. So that just like letting that sit was big for me, because during the summer it's really easy to like see your friends having fun and like wanting to do all these things. It's really the self-discipline that'll get you through, is one. And two, when you take full length practice exams, like, I know after the 5 hours you're like, okay, I'm tired, I just want to be done. You should go back and review those exams thoroughly. They say it should take you almost the same amount of time that it took you to take the test, to go through it and really see the questions you got wrong, see why you got them wrong, what is a trend of the questions that you see yourself missing. Like, really dive deep into those exams. I think I should have done a better job of that, because I feel like you'll see progress a lot faster if you know the types of questions you continuously get wrong. And those are my 2 cents.
I'll jump in with a couple of things. I actually don't think I would have done much differently. I used the Kaplan book, I used Chad's videos, and I used the physics like Kaplan question bank, and I don't have any regrets about using those resources to get me the score that I wanted and needed. One, if you are using the Kaplan book, which I was at practice up at SCO this morning and just surveying my classmates, majority of people said that's also what they used. One of my biggest, like, I guess, kind of hacks, take that massive book, it weighs like 10 pounds or whatever, take it to FedEx Kinko's and have them bind like each section. So you're no longer like carrying around a massive book. So if I when I was working part-time on my lunch break, I would just like take the math section with me and work a couple of the math problems. So that's just like one random thing that makes just lugging that book around a little bit easier. I studied at the pool. That was exciting with my smaller book. And also take time to practice on a whiteboard or a laminated sheet of paper. It's just kind of a different dynamic when you're having to work problems using like a dry erase marker than it is a pen and pencil. And I didn't actually know that was a thing until later on in the summer when I was studying. So that is the thing. Someone asked, where did I take my book to split up the section? I took it to a FedEx office or a FedEx Kinko's that was near my house. And it was maybe a couple dollars, but it wasn't very expensive there. So yeah, my advice is, so one of the things that I struggle with even now still in optometry school is I like studying the things that make me feel smart. So anytime I like open up class notes, I'll look at something that I'm kind of familiar with. And that's nice to boost confidence. But at the end of the day, like, you really just need to focus on what you're least confident with. And so for the OAT, that was always a struggle. I'd like want to open the book to something that felt comfortable. But over time, I just had to kind of delve into it. So that would be my advice, is really just identify your weaknesses and focus there.
Alrighty, so I know we're going a little bit over time, but I do want to give all of our attendees a chance to ask questions of our panelists here. I know Serena, she had to run off to lab, so she's no longer on the webinar with us, but I did share her email here, so please feel free to reach out to her if you have any specific questions. But while we are here, I do want to open up to questions from our attendees, please use the chat feature, or you can use the Q&A feature, and then we'll be able to see those questions and get them addressed.
Hey, Avery, while we're waiting for questions, I just wanted to add in something.
Yes, go ahead.
If you take, so I didn't use the Kaplan book because I can't read. So I took a bunch of practice tests via Crack the OAT and the Kaplan ones. Know that if you take these practice tests, they're way harder than the OAT. I think I took my last one like a week before I took the OAT, and I scored a 290, and I was like, I'm going to fail, but just know they're like set up so they're way harder than the actual test. So don't let that get your confidence down.
Thank you. We do have a question from Sonia. How do you prevent yourself from getting burnt out while reviewing?
So, I mean, that's tough. I mean, everyone gets burnt out, but I think a lot of that is making a schedule for yourself that's actually like written out. It's amazing what like having already done the planning parts of studying does to like just kind of, you're like, oh, well, right now I'm supposed to be studying biology, so I guess I'll just, be studying biology. Another tip that a lot of people use is kind of study in chunks. So you set like a timer for like 30 minutes, and then you just work really, really hard for 30 minutes. And then when your timer goes off, you just you take like a 5-minute break, and then you go for another 30 minutes. And that works pretty good for me. I also didn't get a chance to say like what I did for preparing. So I did Chad's prep, and it was so helpful. Definitely do Chad's prep, and it's free. I think I ended up buying like one of his pro packages, mostly because I think he's awesome. But it's pretty much free, and they have a couple practice tests and practice problems too. The Kaplan book was pretty helpful, but probably the most helpful thing that I did was taking as many practice tests as I could get my hands on. And some of them are kind of expensive, but I bought them anyway, like from Kaplan. And then like I think a couple other people talked about, I went through every single question, especially the ones that I got wrong after taking the test, and I figured out how to work that type of problem. And then I'd write down kind of how to attack that type of problem in a notebook, and then I would kind of review those each night that I was studying. And then when I'd take another test, if I hopefully I'd remember how to attack that type of problem. And when you start taking more of these practice tests, you do realize that a lot of these chemistry problems and things like that, they really are the same types of problems. And you can attack them like the same way that you've learned to attack another problem. And that was really helpful. And the Kaplan tests really are a lot harder. They make you like calculate things more directly. The actual OAT was a little bit more superficial. And another thing, when you are taking these practice tests and the actual OAT, if you don't know the answer right off the bat, especially if it's like a calculation type problem, just skip it. It'll save you so much time in the end, because there's a lot of gimme questions that you can just get right off the bat, and then spend more time on the ones you don't know how to do later and try and figure those out. That's really important. For the reading comp section, I did really well on that. And my method for that was I would practice reading, like doing the practice test. I would make like a mental roadmap while I was reading. So I'd kind of make a flow chart in my brain of like exactly what's happening, and like consciously make that while I read the section. Then when I got to the questions, because I already had this roadmap, I could go straight to the place where I expected to find the answer really easily. And that was really effective. I think one of the our other classmates used what Kaplan calls search and destroy. And it's kind of like read the question and go find the answer. And when I did that, I just never had enough time, and I couldn't find the answers. So that was what I did.
Got it. Thank you. We do have a few other questions in the queue. Let's see. I'm going to come back to that shadowing question real quick. I want to address the OAT specific questions first, but I'll come directly back to that. Let's see, was it difficult to do general chemistry or physics problems without a calculator? What are your tips for those sections? Also, how was the math section with that basic calculator?
I can answer this one. I will say I'm not familiar anymore of which sections you get the calculator on. But they're not going to give you math that you can't do without a calculator. So it's going to be basic, just know your basic timetables and basic division tables, and you should be good for all of that. Same with the basic calculator. I felt like I could do everything that I needed with it, and I practiced like doing math practice problems with my computer calculator. So I was pretty familiar with it. But yeah, it's not complex math that you're going to get on a Gen Chem test or a physics test by any means. It might be like 4x and 2x, and then you just divide it and get 2, stuff like that.
Great, thank you. Another question, would you recommend using a tutor to study and prepare?
I think that's really going to be personal preference. I'm a big proponent of like getting a tutor if you need one for your academic coursework, like in undergrad. And that might help with your OAT prep as well. But it's up to you, I think, about your own like self-motivation. And if there's something that just like makes you so frustrated every time you sit down with it that you're not making progress, that might be a good indication to reach out for help. And a good place for that, honestly, might be like somebody else who's a current optometry student that you might know, or someone else that you know that's applying. There are like tutoring services, but those can be more expensive at some times. And so, I mean, some people need to spend the money to do it, but I feel like there are other kind of resources that you could rely on first.
Yeah, I agree. I had a friend who applied the same year that I did, and he got the Kaplan course. And he would tell me about it, and I know it walks you through a lot of these things. They have daily videos that you watch, and then it's kind of like a course. And so you kind of got to figure out how you learn, if that's best for you, or if you're a little bit better at like figuring out what you know and what you don't know and where you need to put your time. But there's lots of different options depending on how you learn.
Great, thank you. I have a few other questions. If I took my OAT late July, is that still considered early in terms of applying? I'll go ahead and address that one. Late July is certainly still pretty early in the admission cycle. Of course, when you're making your plans, it's great to use that June 30th opening as your deadline, so you can be sure to get your application in as early as possible. But if you're taking your OAT in July and there's no need to retake, and you're able to get your application submitted fully immediately after, then you should still be in a good position in the cycle to be considered for a lot of scholarships and things like that. It wouldn't be nearly as competitive as waiting until November, December, January, or February to submit your application. And then I'm going to do OAT questions first, and I'm going to follow back up with some of the ones around shadowing. But Sonia asked, did you study alone or with other people?
I studied alone.
I also studied alone.
I also will kind of like add an addendum to that, is that my school, a pre-optometry organization, didn't exist. So if I had been at a larger school where they did exist, I might have studied with other people like I do now at SCO, but it wasn't really an option for me.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm going to swing back up around to these shadowing questions. A couple of questions around shadowing experience, what your shadowing experience was like, and then how many hours were required to shadow an optometrist. How about if someone wants to talk about real quickly, real briefly, their shadowing experience first?
I can talk about my experience. So my experience shadowing, I made sure that I think I had about 50 hours, but I feel like that's on the higher end. So I was able to find a local vision therapy doctor that actually transitioned from primary care to VT. So she was my doctor when I was a child, and I highly suggest reaching out to your current doctor as a easy first point of contact. So I was able to go to her for like refractive type exams, and then when she started doing VT, I was able to go see what vision therapy is like, and help with rehabilitation with some of the kids. Besides that, I've reached out to local optometrists in my area, and I was able to get in with one that's more disease specific. So he was able to teach me about all the testing they do, bring me into cases, look at specific case studies. But basically, shadowing your day is with everyone I was with, they basically said you stay as long as you want, so don't be pressured. And you basically just watch what their day-to-day life is. I highly recommend it. I'm pretty sure you need it, but it's just really great to see, is this what you want to be doing for the rest of your life? Because by no means do you want to get trapped into something you're going to end up hating. And it also gives you, by going to multiple specialties or modalities, it lets you see like where you would want to end up, say if you don't like one but you love another.
Great.
I can
Oh, please,
just
sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
just really quickly. Yeah, I recommend if you are in a location that has multiple practice modalities, which means access to a private practice versus one that maybe specializes in contact lenses. I did a lot of shadowing in low vision, which is my area of interest, also with a vision therapy doctor. I actually had like over 160 shadowing hours, but I had been shadowing basically my entire undergrad experience. So that is definitely not expected. But I just really enjoyed it. I mean, I was just like, can you let me hang out here? And most of the doctors wanted me to, so that was good.
Great, thank you. And then I'm going to go ahead and address these last two questions of how many hours are required to shadow an optometrist. We at SEO do not have a solid set requirement for shadowing. We understand that every student situation is a little bit different, so we wouldn't want anyone to feel held back because they are denied any kind of access or resources to get this kind of shadowing, but our firm recommendation is going to be 45 plus hours spread out between about 3 different optometry facilities or clinics or optometric specialties. Certainly gaining more shadowing is always wonderful. We love to see that a student is taking that type of time and initiative to gain multiple shadowing hours. Also, we understand that due to COVID-19, a lot of clinics or optometrists are not allowing as much physical shadowing as in normal circumstances. So something we recommend to students and something that's been really beneficial are informational interviews where you're able to interview an optometrist for an hour and a half over Zoom, over the phone, things like that. We've also found that those informational interviews can even be more beneficial than shadowing it sometimes. I know with shadowing, you may feel like you're just trying to stay out of the way and kind of blend into the environment in whatever clinic you're shadowing in. But with these informational interviews, you're able to ask very direct questions and get very direct answers about the things that truly interest you about the field and the career of optometry. Also, doing informational interviews opens up your flexibility. If you're interested in, say, sports vision or pediatrics in optometry, and you know that there's a sports vision therapist who's making real strides in the field on the other side of the country, reach out to them. Optometrists are universally known for loving their job and loving talking about how much they love their job. So no matter who you reach out to, I'm sure they will be more than happy to take that time to speak with you and share some insights about the experience. So again, for those students who are unable to gain as much physical experience shadowing due to COVID-19, those informational interviews can certainly help add to your experience levels overall. And then for signing up, what we consider to be a late application deadline, of course, March 1st is the date that the application closes. So any applications submitted after that date are most likely not going to be able to be viewed. But my recommendation from this side of the SEO team would be to get your application in before the new year. So say if our application opens in June, to go ahead and have yours submitted by December or November at the latest. I think that would be a great way to go ahead and be early enough where it's going to be a little bit less competitive. Also, that will make you a bit more eligible for the scholarships we have available. Our scholarship system is first come, first serve. So even if you're a perfect candidate for some scholarships, if those scholarships have been depleted, then there may be a chance that you would not be eligible for them or able to receive them just because they're no longer available. So using November and December as your drop dead, I think will help you go a long way and eliminate a lot of extra stress. And then last question I want to take from Grace: what kind of questions would one ask in informational interviews besides how you got into this job and why? How about real quickly, if we have any of our ambassadors who would have any recommendations for good questions to ask practicing optometrists in an interview?
Yeah, I think it's great to ask about why they chose to practice where they did. And by that, I don't necessarily mean like the city that they're in, but kind of like the setting that they're in. And then things that they're looking forward to in the future for the profession, or things that make them nervous about the profession in the future. It's always kind of good to have that insight. And if you have a doctor that is willing to share this with you, it might even be beneficial to ask about like a career. So like how you make a business out of an optometry practice. But not all doctors are willing to share like financials with you. But if that's something you're interested in one day, it would be cool to find a doctor who would share that.
Just to add on, I think this like COVID situation has made it like a great opportunity to find a bunch of different modalities again across the country necessarily, but just saying like again why they like prefer this over say disease, why they prefer sports vision, vision therapy, just refraction, figure out what about the modality or this like specialty that they decided to be in is for them, and like what makes it stand out, I think is just a good starting point.
Yeah, and you know, I studied, or I shadowed in a few different practices, and all the doctors that I talked to, you know, they said how much they love their job, and after I shadowed, I ended up doing an internship and then working in a practice. And after spending, you know, more and more time with practice, I realized that this is definitely what I wanted to do, and it's where I needed to be. I had some friends who ended up shadowing, and the doctor was like, "Yeah, don't be an optometrist because of this or that." And so if you end up, you know, working with a doctor who doesn't love his job, don't let it, you know, deter you. You know, try some other doctors and get their experiences, because you know, it's just a great profession, and SEO is just awesome. So.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, then, I'm going to take that as our last question for now. I know we've got a little bit over. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. That brings us to the end of our webinar for this month. I know we have covered a lot of information today, but I do hope this has been some assistance as you start on an optometric journey. Emails have been shared and contact information. If you do have any questions, I'm sure our ambassadors are always willing and able to talk and share some of their experiences. You can also reach out to us here at SEO at admissions@sco.edu at any time. Our next webinar will be held on Thursday, April 8th at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, and the focus will be becoming a competitive applicant, hosted by our Director of Admissions and Enrollment, Dr. Mike Robertson. The registration link will be live on the website tomorrow. If you haven't done so already, I invite you to request more information by signing up for our inquiry form. If you complete your inquiry form, you will receive a personal advisor and a personalized brochure with information relevant to your goals and experiences around optometry. Finally, thank you to our student ambassadors for sharing of their time and experiences today. I know we are in the midst of several storms happening right now in Memphis, so I really appreciate you guys taking the time to brave the weather, even from the comfort of your own homes, to participate. And of course, thank you to all of our attendees for taking some time out of your day for joining us. We hope to see you all at our next webinar in April. And Anna, yes, this entire presentation will be recorded, is being recorded, and it will go live on our website tomorrow. But you guys will also receive a link to this webinar and a follow-up email. All righty, but so if we don't have any more questions, I believe we will call that an end to today's webinar. I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and please take care.